Do you believe in miracles? Well, if not, then this story's for you. Of course, most people could hardly believe what we're going to tell you today. In addition, this is not surprising since this case is not amiable to science, and no one, not even the most experienced specialist, can explain it. Most likely, if it were not for the witnesses who discovered our main character and who didn't see what was happening with their own eyes, we would hardly have even learned about this fantastic story. A wolf pack rescued a pregnant woman with twins in a forest in the winter. What happened to her shocked everyone. Our story today takes place a long time ago in a remote village in Ukraine during a freezing winter. Snow blanketed the ground and covered the trees of the nearby forest. There was a young woman living in the village who was pregnant with twins. The young woman's husband was an angler and was away on his boat on a long fishing trip. It was his last trip of the year before the bay completely froze over, so he was going to stay out for several days to catch as many fish as he could while he was away. It was up to the young woman to take care of the house, even though she was due to have her baby twins soon. In addition, this was how she was feeling before the most exciting moment of her life. A feeling that you are one person is firmly embedded in your psyche. It's one of those fundamental facts of life we can always rely on. And then that feeling suddenly goes away with the first kick of a tiny human in your belly. Now, for some women, it goes away much earlier, looking at a micro peanut on an ultrasound screen. And suddenly, you're two. There's you, and there's a little alien in your belly. He totally takes over your body and your mind. You cry over insurance commercials, crave strawberries, and walk carefully so that the little baby doesn't fall out accidentally. At some point, you realize that the tiny invader can communicate with you. He kicks you swiftly in your ribs if he's uncomfortable or surprised. If he hears his daddy's laughter, he kicks you in the ribs again. He grows so big you feel like your bottom will fall out at any moment. This young woman was powerful and got by on her own. She even had to walk several miles through the woods every day to get fresh water for cooking, cleaning, and drinking. She'd make this trip for water at the end of the day, ensuring that she was back home before the sun went down. After the sun went down, it became too cold to be out in the forest, and there were dangerous animals to worry about too on this particular day. Everyone in the village was talking about the weather. The winds had picked up overnight, which usually meant that a big snowstorm was coming, and all the anglers would be returning that night to hunker down with their families until everything thawed out again in the spring. The young woman heard all the talk about the storm, and she was excited that her husband would be returning home that night. She put her hands on her belly and felt movement from within. Oh, they couldn't come back a moment too soon, she thought to herself. These baby twins will be coming any minute now. The young woman quickly set about tidying up the house in preparation for his arrival. She thought to herself, I'll make a hot, delicious stew for dinner. That way, when my husband comes home from the cold, we can share a nice hot meal. What better way to celebrate? Therefore, after her usual daily work, the young woman went to the market to buy ingredients for the stew. And while she was there, she felt a significant movement in her belly. No, not yet, she whispered, rubbing her hands on her stomach. The young woman knew that the time was coming quickly. It was a good thing that her husband would be getting home tonight. She paid for the ingredients, thanked the shopkeeper, and went home to drop off the food. Then the young woman set out with a bucket to get water for the stew. It was a little bit later in the evening than she usually set out, but she was confident that as long as she hurried, she'd be able to make it to the river and back before the sun went down and the snowstorm rolled in. Therefore, with one hand clutching her bucket and the other resting on her pregnant belly, the young woman made her way through the trees. She made it to the river with plenty of time left to get home. So when her belly started to shift and ache again, she took a moment to sit down on a large rock near the water's edge. The pains were more frequent now. Just a little longer, she said aloud to herself. Just wait a little longer. Realizing that she herself couldn't afford to wait, the young woman filled her bucket and started walking quickly back towards the home in the village. She could see that the sun was beginning to set. She did not have much time. So when her belly began to ache again, suddenly she pushed through, and the pain was now coming in waves, but she brushed each one aside and continued on. but it finally became too much for her to bear. The young woman winced and cried out as her stomach spasmed, and she slipped on a rock on the path. She twisted her ankle badly and tumbled to the ground. She protected her stomach as she fell and landed on her side, but the bucket of water splashed all over her, thoroughly soaking and shivering. The young woman carefully tried to stand up, but she couldn't put any weight on her ankle. The pain was too great from where she was on the ground. She could see the sun disappearing over the horizon. She could feel the air getting colder, and snow began to fall on her wet body. Her heart started to race. She knew that if she did not get help soon, she and her unborn babies would die out there in the cold. However, she was brave and she wouldn't give up. She crawled as best she could along the path back toward the village, calling out for help as loudly as she could, but it was no use. She was too far away, and everyone else was sheltered in for the night. She cried out once more, this time in pain as her stomach spasmed again. But then she heard something that filled her with fear. Echoing through the trees was a howling pack of wolves that were getting closer. The young woman stopped moving and tried to be as quiet as possible. She curled herself up into a ball and tried to hide under her cloak, but she knew that she was exposed out on the path. She could only hope and pray that the wolves would pass her by. She needed a miracle, and she needed it now. Just then, she felt hot breath on the back of her neck. The wolves had found her. The young woman said a quick prayer for her unborn babies and prepared herself for the worst. In the end, she suddenly fainted. Anna had no idea how long she'd been unconscious, but she eventually regained consciousness, feeling wet. Anna said she saw a big gray wolf cuddling like a cushion underneath her, and the other wolves, about 9 of them, surrounded her like a storm shelter. Around 23 minutes later, after licking and scraping all the material and stains from her daughter, a she-wolf gently moved the baby twins to her with her nose after she gave birth to twins over the snow. She was happy to see her baby crying while she was holding her twin babies, so she quickly breastfed them. Instead of attacking her, the wolf had done the strangest thing. It settled down next to her in the snow. The rest of the wolves soon joined in, forming a warm fur barrier against the winter storm. She felt so tired. She breathed a sigh of relief, but then winced in pain again as the contractions in her belly started to intensify. This wasn't over yet. Back in the village, her husband had returned home to an empty house. The angler knew that his wife must have gone out to get water and had not returned, but it was too cold and dangerous to gather a search party to look for her. He waited through the night, praying for her safety. As soon as the sun came up, he gathered friends and neighbors to help him search the woods. But as they stood at the tree line and prepared to go in, someone cried out, "Wait, there she is!" The crowd fell silent and the fisherman rushed to the front. He couldn't believe what he saw. There, striding through the trees, was his young wife. On either side of her walked a large, furry wolf. The young woman was carrying a large bundle in her arms, wrapped in her cloak. As the young woman and her wolf escort reached the tree line, the wolf stopped. The fisherman ran toward his wife and greeted her and smiled. When he heard the cry of her 2 baby twins rising up from the bundle in her arms, the young woman smiled and pulled back the corner of the cloak to reveal her newborn twins. The young couple never forgot their miracle or the wolves that saved the young woman and her twin babies. In remembrance, they decided to name one of their babies Wolf. What do you think of this story? Can we get this video 50,000 likes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.